So perhaps I just flail about and try to see what there is to be thought. We don't have to be totally coherent in every recording. Heidegger says here, again going to the beginning of his lectures and his comments on Nietzsche, the fundamental word, quote unquote, life, which governs all of Nietzsche's reflections, I repeat, signifies both beings as such and in general, and the kind and mode of the beings. So all embracing. He then goes on to speak of, so here we are, as it were, in our Aufenthalt with Heidegger once again, and from Heidegger's point of view, what we're supposed to be doing is being useless. We're making another attempt to have a sojourn with uselessness, and but the uselessness is supposed to be mindful. He then says, makes some remarks. This is not an exact quote. Life is human life for Nietzsche, and then he goes on to speak of calculation again. So calculating the advantages and disadvantages according to this life, which is human life. So all this made me think of how so far does Nietzsche stand against Kant and against... so Kant marks a great changeover of the tradition. I'll say that I also wanted to say that my impression, generally speaking, is that the Catholics like Nietzsche. They like him quite a bit. So Zizek, for instance, won't even mention Alexander Dugin. But the Catholics, sometimes you find mentions and even serious discussions of Heidegger with the Catholics. But generally speaking, they don't really like to talk about Heidegger, is my impression. They like to talk about Nietzsche because... And my impression is the reason is because they can dismiss him quite readily. They say Nietzsche, it's sort of like if you ask a rabbi about Jesus, they say, oh, well, that's somebody who took the wrong path. So they'll say Nietzsche just likes to wander around, it's aimless, it's endless, but why would you want to do that? Why don't you come with us and find the right path? That's sort of the way the Catholics dismiss Nietzsche, and you see discussion of Nietzsche even in the Pope's encyclicals and so on. He's not at all a figure that they don't regard highly. It's much more difficult for them to dismiss Heidegger. So I think in connection, so what level are we talking about? This is what I've been thinking about. What level, where are the political disputes, like between Rawls and Nozick, between Hobbes and Vital. Where are the political disputes end, and where do the the disputes that seem, at least from philosophy, or let's just say from Heidegger, what seem from Heidegger to be more superficial? Where are they? Where is Nietzsche in this regard? So I think of the counter of Zizek. So Zizek makes this. He provides this this wonderful metaphor of the where he says Hitchcock provides us with this vertigo, this lavish image in Vertigo of Kim Novak pointing to a coastal redwood and saying, here I was born and here I died. And he said, this is the way he thinks about philosophy. Kant is where he's born, Hegel's where he died. So this German idealism. So I think in this terms of, we just said, let me repeat it, the fundamental word, quote unquote, life, which governs all of Nietzsche's reflections, signifies both beings as such and in general, and the kind and mode of those beings. So it's like philosophers of the, how did they call them? The object-oriented philosophy. They talk about the philosophy of access. So any being whatsoever, how can it have an experience? What are the conditions for any experience? This is the Kantian issue. This is a big break from regarding. I see an animal and thinking of being with senses, with eyes, with touch, with hearing. I'm thinking about what it's like for an animal in an environment, in the world, in an environment. However, we don't know exactly how the Greeks. I would say it's difficult. It's problematic to think of how the Greeks thought of that prior to the concept of environment, prior to the concept of experimental biology, prior to all the concepts that we're infused with and permeate our thinking. But in any case, it's not the idea of simple access to reality as such, which seems to be the way Nietzsche's thinking, and then it makes me think that Nietzsche is closer to the Kantian kind of philosophy of access. He's talking about everything, although probably although one could say much more let's say in a jocund way, in a freer way than Kant would. Kant is more rigorous. Nietzsche speaks of the myth of the once upon a time, and so on. He's more free about it, but from Heidegger's point of view, he hasn't come to Dasein. He hasn't come to being. Now, if you think about the juxtaposition between Zizek, who speaks very strongly against Heidegger when Heidegger evokes his sort of back to the land. Maybe Zizek takes that as a back to the land type of way of thinking, like a Lebensraum, sort of a Nazi way of thinking. But on the other hand, there's different ways one can think about it. So one could say that the problem of nature is very problematic throughout the history of the West, and for the longest time, one thinks of nature. Hobbes and the social contract thinkers throw nature back into something prior to convention. But on the other hand, nature has its primary and essential meaning in Western thinking as that which human beings are destined to and called to fulfill. So, like that which, if we're able to achieve it, will be at home. That's which we're our teleology, as it were. Bees make their hives, and human beings have something that we're called to by nature, and that is our nature, and that's in a way equivalent to what Aristotle understands as life and the inner principle of nature, which then in the time of the Galilean physics gets broken apart and no longer is treated as straightforwardly cogent, because they think of just forces working on forces in every direction, not the inner principle of motion of our human nature. So why does Zizek? At what level is this Zizek versus Heidegger happening? Is this a political level, or is it a deeper level? There's the question of Zizek is still thinking in terms of the rationality. He wants there to be the rational to be the real. Heidegger and is Nietzsche then? Therefore, Nietzsche just says the will is the real. Whatever. Will is a more complex subject matter if you think of it in terms of the way Nietzsche was tutored by Schopenhauer. And Schopenhauer, in a word, Schopenhauer says, Hume says causality is fictive, and Kant says causality is what the human being takes it to be. And then Schopenhauer says, as it turns out, it's just whatever the will to will, not our purposeful wishing, not our purposeful intentions, but the will, it's whatever strikes us as being necessary, then we take to be a causal relation. And this has something to do with Nietzsche's will to power and will to will. Schopenhauer gives the example of, to refute the Hume-Kant business. He talks about, is it so that because day follows night, that night as caused day, or the other way, whichever way you want to state it. And we don't believe that, right? So just something following something in the human race is this objection, but it's some things begin to strike us as cogent, as causal relations, as and then this is what, in a way, still Nietzsche's thinking about in terms of the will. Some things just strike us as cogent, and then this becomes our reality. This is not the way, however, that Heidegger is thinking about it in the Dasein, or in the being approach to things. And therefore, you could say, it's convenient to say then, from the point of view of Heidegger, although it's wrong to say from the point of view, because that's a Nietzschean way of thinking of it. But still, from the point of view of Heidegger, you can say people like Nietzsche, even people later on who are sort of epigons, who are sort of just Erstat, like from this point of view, Zizek would be, because it's already, the ideas are already played out. We've already come to the end of philosophy from where Heidegger stands, from where Husserl stands. It's not that they're saying things that are false. It's that they're showing us more and more of what's possible with respect to all beings taken in this frame that he's mentioning here, where he says life is taken as this ultimate principle, then this calculative thinking comes under it, and life fills this whole, everything that he just said, both beings as such, everything that there is, and in general, also our conceptual thinking. Concepts kind of mean thinking in general rather than the thing that I can point to right in front of me, and the kind and mode of beings. So it's, to some extent, we might think that Nietzsche is still in this kind of at the level of the ring in the tree, and that Hitchcock has provided us through his lavish art. But let us go on with that in the next